Okay guys, so tonight we're going to do something a little different. We're going to do another Lazy Susan table with light, but instead of mounting the Lazy Susan near the top of the table or even on top of it like we've done with some past ones, we're actually going to suspend it beneath the table, right about here, with the bearing. The light source is also going to be down here, so you're going to have a full directional light. And we're going to use a different bulb than we've used in the past. I like to play around with different stuff. So I bought this little Bolt LED. This one happens to be green. I got a bunch of these. I'll show you how to mount a Bolt LED light, again suspended on a Lazy Susan for your hookah. This will also give you a great amount of stability for your hookah. So your hookah is going to sit inside the table as opposed to on top of it. So if you've got an obnoxious cat or a drunk buddy or all your friends suck, you have a table for them now, okay? So let's get started. Okay, so first thing we need to do with any of these tables is find our center point. Like always, you could, unless you wanted it off center, that's your choice. This table has rounded corners, but you really can't see it where the corners meet. There's actually a line that I can use. So I'm going to go ahead and mark my center point. Okay guys, so we've marked our center point right here, obviously, and now we need to draw a couple of concentric rings. The first one is going to be the interior diameter of our Lazy Susan bearing, so we'll draw that one. That'll help us mount it later. And then the next one we're going to draw is actually going to be the hole cutout at whatever size we decide. I think I'm going to go 10 inches on this, where our hookah will set in. This will also be the platform that Lazy Susan sits on. So let's do that really quickly if Jason can follow me. With our compass set to 2 1/4, we're going to go ahead and mark our circle for the Lazy Susan. It's okay if you can't see it really well because it's just a visual guide for us later. Okay, so that's marked. The next one we need to do is for our actual cutout. So in order to mark our hole for our actual port for the hookah base, my compass isn't large enough. So what we're going to do is actually use the hole cutting tool that we made in a previous tutorial. So I'll show you this thing is quite versatile. Hopefully you'll watch that. If not, you might want to pause and go watch that. Make yourself one of these, unless you happen to have a very large compass laying around. So I'm just going to put the nail here on my center point that I drew earlier. Hammer that in. Just take a nice carpenter's pencil. Stick it in with the mark that I want. On this, it's actually at the 5-inch mark because I'm in 1 inch. So to get a, I'm doing a 10-inch hole, excuse me. So to get a 10-inch hole, I have to go to the 6-inch mark, which is effectively a 5-inch radius. And we're just going to mark that. So as you can see, we now have our hole for the bearing, which is actually the inner diameter of the bearing. This is the size of the port that we're going to cut out for our base to fall through. And clearly our hole cutting tool is actually pretty stinking good. So let's go ahead and start there. We'll cut out that hole. So just start out slowly. And now we have our starting hole. Okay, so with our pilot hole drill, we're going to go ahead and put our hole cutting tool back on. It's back to the pilot hole you drilled. Okay, so the next step, we're going to go ahead and use our hole cutting tool we made before, but first we need to get ourselves some more of this carpet seaming tape. Let's cut a piece off. Set the roll aside for a moment. We're going to cut a slit or a notch, and whatever you want to call it, for the actual blade on the jigsaw, so that can move freely. And we will apply this now to our jigsaw. We're going to go ahead and drop our blade in when we want it. And be sure to give yourself a smidgen of room from the edge of the cutout here so your blade's not touching your yardstick. Okay, now we start our cut. When you do this, you're really not going to be able to see where your blade's hitting. Doesn't matter. The whole idea here is keep your cutting tool in position. Keep your saw in position on the cutting tool. Okay. Voila, we cut a perfect hole. So as you can see, we cut a nice, smooth, almost perfect circular hole with this. And then I've got this tiny little divot where I had the hole drilled, but our edging is going to cover that. And this is now also the platform for our Lazy Susan. So let's move on. So I realized as I was doing this that I like the top surface of our table better than the bottom. And when we put this together, wherever I secure the bearing, this actually becomes the bottom. So what I did was I drew a second circle on the bottom side using my nail hole as the center point. So we have, again, a great spot for our bearing. And the next thing we need to do is actually create the base in which this is going to sit. So this would be the top of the Lazy Susan that we're building. I have this particle board laying around. This is going to be our bottom. Alright, so we have our square, our platform for our Lazy Susan, so it's going to sit like this. What we need to do now is drill 2 more holes on this, alright, both in the centers, one on the top portion of the Lazy Susan. So if we're looking at it like this, we're going to do a 1.5 inch hole right here with our spade. That's actually going to let the light pass out for our bulb that's going to be seated in our stand. So for this one, it's actually a 5/8, and then we're going to do 1.5 on top. This is going to be a 5/8. We're going to do a 1.5 inch on top. That way, if we angle the light, we won't lose any of that. So let's go ahead and start on that. So we'll mark our, like I said, our relative center because this is not the best square I've ever cut in my life. And with this too, while we've got it, we're going to go ahead and trace the other part of our bearing right now. Okay, so we've got our hole cut out on our top. Now we need to drill out the bottom where our light's going to mount. And this particle board I have is actually deeper than the socket for this light. So we're going to drill a hole through. We're going to come on the other side and countersink it so we have room to work with. Okay, so we flipped it over. Now we're going to drill the countersink. Spade bits are meant to have that center point actually drill through and guide it. I've already drilled that out, so this might bounce a little bit, but nothing we can't handle. Okay, so you can see as we were drilling this out, it bounced around on us a little bit. It doesn't really matter. No one's going to see it. We're just using that to attach our light. So like we normally do when we do these Lazy Susans, if you watch any of the other ones, we mount it to the top of the Lazy Susan first, which will make life a lot easier later. Alright, so with our bearings centered on a mark we made earlier, our circle, we're going to go ahead and mark the holes for our screws. We're going to attach it to the top and then detach it, and then the holes we make now are going to be our guides later. Normally we would mount this upside down with how I have it, but the thickness of this wood is really limiting us on screw choices, and the size of this hole is too big for the screws I have that are small enough to not pass. So we had to flip it over, and we're using the smaller holes to use the smaller screws. Not normally how I would recommend doing it. If you can, you want the wider holes down right now. We don't have that choice though. So screw these in. Okay, so we've screwed these in and we've unscrewed them, and now we have nice little guide holes later for when we're doing the difficult part of this, the pain in the butt part. So we can do now, take our top, move it off to the side. Now we have to secure this bad boy to our platform. Now, with our Lazy Susan bearing attached, what we need to do is drill out our guide hole or our access hole to attach it to the top. So we're going to spin it into a star shape, find our holes that we're going to be screwing through, and drop down through it and mark it. So we have a small mark right here, and we're going to drill out a nice big hole that will let our screwdriver pass through it. Alright, so now you can see, Jason, if you'll zoom in for me, you can see we've drilled a pilot hole so that we can actually pass through the bottom and screw into our top for our Lazy Susan bearing. Okay, that was the goal of this. So we're going to take our bolt light, unscrew the attachment, the thread or the nut that comes with it. We're going to pass it through the top, like so. Actually, is this one I want to use? Probably. One of these is blue, one is green. I don't care. Get it nice and flush. Then on this side, tighten her down. so with our light secured, we're going to go ahead and line up our first hole for the top, like so. Then we'll line it up with one of our drilled out holes. So much easier. Okay, so you can see we've got our Lazy Susan attached platform and turn the power on. Got a nice bright green light. So we're done with that. Now, JP, how do we actually attach this or suspend it to our table? God, I'm glad you asked. Okay, so the next step, we need to make our bracket to suspend our bearing. And for that, we're going to use 2 corner braces and 2 heavy-duty L brackets. In the next tutorial we do, we'll actually use threaded rods so we can create an adjustable platform, but for this one we're going to go easy. So what we want to do right now is go ahead and line up and assemble our suspension bracket. Okay, so we have our brackets made and assembled, all tightened down with our locking washers, so these things are sturdy as all get out. And the idea here is we're going to use the angle brace on the platform we made, and the L bracket is going to sit on the top of our, or underneath the top of our table. Fuck it, dude, it's in. Strip away. This won't be my table spun off, you know? Here's what I didn't think of in this project, guys, so learning lesson. I pointed these out thinking that'd be the better way to go. I now realize I need to point in because the table's not wide enough. So I'm going to undo these bolts and we'll fix that. Okay, so I've reversed my brackets here so they stick in now. So all we have to do, drop it upside down. Okay, guys, so what we need to do now is square up our corners, corner braces. So what you want to do is set your table in, press it flat, press your braces flat so that they flatten out like that. You want to measure from the outer edge to the inside of the bracket. On this side, which is 2.5 inches, and over here, which I've already measured, is 2.5 inches. Then what we're going to do, get it back on my marks here. Then what we will do is trace our holes where our screws are going to go. Do the same on this side. Now I realize there are better ways to do this, but we're amateurs, guys. That's why you're watching this video, alright? This is how an amateur does it. Quickly, easily, without any special tools. Alright, so we marked all of our holes. What we'll do now is take one off and screw it in, and then we'll reattach it. Okay, so we've mounted our brackets to our L brackets to the top of our table, or the bottom of the top of our table, on both sides, and then we've reattached our base platform. So really quickly what we'll do is we'll flip this over. You can see that's pretty sturdy, it's not going anywhere. And our Lazy Susan in the center with our light. The last thing we have to do now is go ahead and mount and wire our battery.
Video 10.